Micah. Thank you, Andrew and Chris. If I had a fluffy heart cloud machine, I would turn it on right now. In fact, for this whole audience, this is my favorite conference of the year. So, Congress, I know what you're thinking. What a spectacle. Isn't that where all good ideas go to die? It's a joke. Well, I'm going to persuade you today that our legislature is less sordid than it is obsolete, that it's less corrupt than it is utterly incapacitated and unable to handle the demands of 21st century democracy. The good news? Today, technology and transparency can revolutionize how we govern ourselves in the first branch of government. Here's a basic, simplified flowchart of how a bill becomes law. Transparency changes just in the last couple of years were unimaginable even 10 years ago. When I got to work on Capitol Hill in the late 90s, we were still using WordPerfect. Today, almost every committee hearing is webcast. But keep in mind, this is a dramatic generational shift. For many members of Congress, using the tab key instead of 5 spaces is a tech revelation. I'm not kidding. The obsolescence problem is that it's one of information management, actually. Congress can't sort and filter the amount of incoming information that it's getting. It can't really distinguish easily on the whole between fact and fiction. This signal-to-noise problem is worse in this policymaking process itself. So what is the role of technology in politics? Why are we here today? Well, in order to lay this problem out, we need to actually think like a member of Congress. A member's life is striking a balance between campaigning and governing. Today, governing is starting to look a lot more like campaigning, and it's failing all of us. Likewise, campaign technology is not always adequate for governing. I have a good friend who's a chief of staff for a member of Congress, and recently he told me, he said, stop with the petitions. Stop with these clickable links. I need experts in the room, and I need the political incentive to use facts. So, what does that tell us? It tells us that members of Congress and staff are willing, but what they need is a broader aperture of knowledge and more refined knowledge assistance during the decision-making process itself. And today, we can be present before, after, and during the policymaking process. At its very best, governing technology will create accountability in the room in real time for using the best information possible when they're making the trade-offs. Now, this is how you create an accountability system for knowledge. I don't want to downplay campaign technology. It's extremely useful. It alerts the public to issues. It can move an issue to the front of the pack. It consolidates many voices into a manageable piece of input. But governing tech is and should be different. It serves a different need. Here's the incapacitation problem on Capitol Hill. Right now, Congress is basically working with 70% of 1979 levels of staff. And the incoming communication is overwhelming. It's getting 800%, 800 to 1,000%, this is 2010 numbers, more incoming communication. And campaigning for office is getting so expensive that many members are having to spend half their time raising money, dialing for dollars in the party headquarters. There's no hours left in the day to govern, much less read or do research. So this is an institution that is overwhelmed by information, yet starved for expertise. The problem is the state of our legislature is not an accident, it's an outcome. In 1994, the US Congress had the world's premier science advisory body attached to it. It had something like 120 science experts dedicated to the House and Senate to be present during the process of policymaking. Their job was to unpack or translate complexity and talk about the implications of policy decisions that were being made. In 1995, this whole system was eliminated. The new GOP majority came in, and one of the first things they did was fire the technologists. They eliminated its analytical ability, and then they dismantled its ability to do predictive modeling. And to be fair here, the Republicans sort of dealt this fatal blow, but neither party since, including the Democrats, have taken any moves to reinstate this shared knowledge system for Congress. So the system collapsed. The other piece of this is the social capital piece, that members lost their shared space. They lost the place to take risks, to innovate, to seek unlikely partners. And they've lost their ability to shape the future outside political party control. And we all see this every day with the talking points. So today, the problems that require collaborative problem solving are the most neglected, these big picture complex problems. Instead of scholarship, we're getting talking points and even more and more of this social media noise. I was a national security expert on Capitol Hill for almost a decade. And a lot of the time I spent up there was just recreating some kind of a shared knowledge system so we could discuss modern security needs. Congress was stuck in this old Cold War, us versus them perspective. It had no place internally for an informed discussion about complicated, complex, connected issues. To this day, it's failing to address the major issues confronting us. Indeed, this Congress, your Congress today, is far better prepared to confront Napoleon in a land war than deal with any number of today's globally connected threats, from extreme weather to epidemics to asteroids, which just happened last week. I'm sure you were all watching. So how does disruptive technology fit into this picture? This is our world, the world of technology. Well, tech has redistributed the power of information for sure. The power of information that used to exist in governments is now accessible to individuals for good and for bad purposes. So we create social networks. We build solidarity. We begin to solve problems. We can topple dictators. We can stop legislation. But we're not leveraging this technology and this cultural change inside Congress yet. All this data, all this access, it's not translating yet into policy change, at least not on the issues I worked on. Congress lacks an ability as an institution to see the big picture. This old, antique, lobotomized system, it can't do the kind of complex oversight that's required of it today. This leads to a glaring contradiction in national security, and I'm going to give you an example. So, the State Department, this is a fundamental dilemma that we're facing right now with distributed power and disruptive technology. Right now, our State Department, your diplomats, are building a two-way conversation with the world to discuss human rights. Meanwhile, the military, one of its biggest, most lucrative platforms that it's building is the unmanned aerial drone. It's an armed drone, and we've been really overusing this technology a lot over the last couple of years. It's very seductive, but we haven't taken into account the consequences of these signature strikes. So the big question for us with the drones versus phones dilemma is this dire contradiction. Do we connect or do we destroy? That's the old versus the new. This is a dilemma that is not sustainable in a transparent, media-saturated world. For a rule of law nation, which we claim to be, it's actually a strategic liability. It makes us weaker. It drains our social capital account because in that account, the currency is reputation, credibility, relationships, and actually the preservation of other people's dignity. We're blowing it. We need to solve for X. One reason that we're in this position is that we have this obsolete, incapacitated legislature. Reliable information that's trusted and expert is not shared inside the process of policymaking. So, let's say X is information sharing inside the process of policymaking. Once we solve for X, once we solve for information sharing, we can take on some more of these big picture, complex oversight problems much more effectively. Once we solve for X, we can solve for N. Let's say N is the public interest. This was Aaron's quest. How do we get a Congress that actually builds legislation that produces outcomes that benefit society? So how do we get Congress to solve for the public interest? This is just an equation I came up with. It's just something to start with. There's nothing definitive or scientific about it. So what's predisposition? The predisposition of a member of Congress is what that person shows up with on the first day. It's where he or she grew up. It's language is spoken. It's military service. It's what district you're representing. It's your education. It's your income level. It's, are you a new member? Are you retiring? So what are norms? In this case, I'm talking about norms that are sort of institutionally and culturally there in front of them every day. That's things like, for Congress, let's follow the leadership all the time to be safe, or let's use the military to achieve security. Some people might call these norms the nudge. It's the path of least resistance. Today, in today's Congress, it's very often, like I said, talking points and ideology, not evidence. So, predisposition, norms, and influence. This is how a member approximates what to do next. I'm going to focus on influence, actually, because I think that's where we can all participate the most. So influence, let me break this down. I'm going to define it for you. What is useful expertise? In this case, for Congress, where power resides, it's validated information, meaning that it's politically meaningful or irrefutable information. It's sometimes called facts on the ground. Golden expertise is when you have validated information that's both politically meaningful and irrefutable. That's what we want to go for in every case. Relationships are more your access to a member. Now, as in real life, relationships that are best are authentic, long-term, trusted. But it's also your access to a member's attention, and that can happen through things like social media. It can also be purchased, like when corporations lobby. I'm going to share a story with you to illustrate some of this. I was working in Congress in 2003 in the run-up to the Iraq War. One morning, I had a meeting with a group of Quakers. This is one of the longest-standing peace organizations in the United States. What they said to me is, we can't do this. We must not invade Iraq. If we do this, we will destroy everything we stand for as a country. That afternoon, I had a meeting with a group of Army academics from the military. This was to brief a report that they had written about the requirements of an occupation. This was just historical research from Japan and Germany after World War II. But what the research pointed to was the fact that we can't execute an occupation, that we don't have the capacity to execute an occupation. This was a truly democratic moment. This was incredibly disparate individuals pointing to the same conclusion for completely different reasons. But the Quakers and the Army in that instance weren't able to exercise their golden expertise or their influence. Their relationships weren't organized in an effective way or at the right time. But I think you all might remember the background of that story was this incredible pro-war misinformation campaign where the dissenting voices were either shouted down or called names. So, a month later, something good did come out of that. So I want you to know something did come out of that experience for me. A month later, I learned that the Defense Department was getting ready to eliminate the Army's Peacekeeping Institute. Now, here we were in the middle of 2 wars, and the DoD was about to eliminate the only military institution learning the lessons of how do you end wars and build stability. So I thought, oh my gosh, who can stop this? Congress. And that's how I got the Quakers to lobby for the Army. So where's this Peacekeeping Institute? Southern Pennsylvania. Who represents Southern Pennsylvania? It was a conservative, traditional conservative who loved the military. Great, I thought. Well, keep in mind, I was working in a California office, one of the most liberal, not just in the House, but on Capitol Hill. But that didn't matter at all. I ran down the hall, and I told his staff what was going on. They were immediately on board. Then I realized I need some hometown people weighing in. The military is forbidden, for very good constitutional reasons, is forbidden from applying political pressure. So I called the Quakers. Once I explained to them what was happening, they got on board as well. So what happened then is that we had golden expertise. So in this case, we were able to stop the DoD with this left-to-right political alliance with the pacifist Quakers supporting a military institution. And what I'd like to point out, too, though, is that this action happened not only on Capitol Hill. We got the DoD to back off. There was some buzz at DoD, and there were some articles in some newspapers. But it also happened in a district. Today, we might think we can do this with a petition. But a petition is not the same thing as a relationship. It is not geographically meaningful like a relationship. We leverage technology to communicate. All of us do this. It helps build relationships, but technology alone is not the same. We have to be present online and offline. And at the end of the day in politics, you have to also show up. Here's Congress again. Today, there are transparency changes in this process that have completely leveled the playing field for being present while Congress is making laws. Today, we can find out what's on the calendar, what the bill says, when the bills are on the floor, how it will be debated. We'll know who can testify in a committee, what the hearings will cover. Every week, more items from Congress become machine readable. So how can we participate in all of this? How about some real-time fact-checking in a hearing from the members' districts that count, from the land-grant schools, from the universities, from experts? How about providing some witness questions, research? How about a stack exchange for committees based on subject matter expertise that's in real time and updated? How about technology surge teams in your home district so you have people there on hand to explain technical problems? Let's take an issue that Congress is dealing with today, and I'm sure you all are following this in the news, gun violence. In April, the Senate killed an amendment that would require background checks for all gun purchases. The House hasn't acted on legislation yet. We have 90% of Americans who think background checks are in the public interest. The issue's not going away. So who are the disparate voices on this issue who aren't showing up together yet? Who are the frenemies? Who might come together? I don't know the whole answer yet, but I know that this is where you'll start. This is the map of the home districts of the House Judiciary Committee. This is where any House conversation, any legislation will start the gears of law. The red dots on this are sites of recent massacres, I guess in the last 10 years, near the districts of the subcommittee chairs. They're the people that have the most power of all to start the conversation. So this is where the policy change has to happen first. This is how we start to stage our sophisticated technology, our expertise, and our relationships. So how do we leverage the shocked conscience of the NRA, the members in those places especially? How do we get local experts to weigh in a way that matters during the process? Police chiefs, educators, doctors, mental health professionals, parents. How do we focus the already considerable social media efforts here? How do we build our offline relationships to matter? How do we engage so we can make real knowledge powerful? I can't think of a better challenge for a bunch of tech-savvy systems thinkers who want to save the world than this. So this is for you, Aaron.